everybody. Today I would like to talk to you about the kind of decks that I think are suitable for folk witches. There will be quite a few decks in this video, so if you're not into that type of content, this is your clue to click away. However, if you would like to see what I consider to be kind of folk witchy decks in my collection, then stick around, I guess. So I would like to show a few different categories of decks. Those will be playing card decks, Lenormand decks, tarot decks, and oracle decks. And I think all of those have a place in anybody's practice. Doesn't matter if you're a folk witch or a fucking, I don't know, like chaos magician. But still, these are decks that for me have the vibes of folk magic and just fit my practice so well. So as I show the decks, I will kind of try to explain why I think they work for me and what kind of role they play in my practice. And those are not necessarily shown for the purpose of you seeing those decks and getting the same decks as me, but rather to start a discussion, perhaps, if you would like to join me here, or just to ponder what kind of decks would fit your practice and why, because I'm sure those wouldn't be the same decks for reasons. Our practice, and especially if we are practitioners of traditional witchcraft or folk magic, these are deeply rooted in where we are. So the local aspect of our craft is important to us, and that of course is often reflected in the tools that we use, including Cartomancy decks, right? So let's get to it. So first, I would like to show some playing card decks that are very local. These are decks that showcase Polish animals, Polish insects, Polish birds, and Polish mushrooms. And while I show you just a few cards from each of those, I would like to explain why I think they are cool and why, to me, they are related to my practice. So, starting with mushrooms, right? These are, of course, the ones that grow in Poland, both poisonous and edibles. In Poland, in our culture, collecting mushrooms, especially in early autumn, is kind of like a national sport almost. Everybody fucking does this. And so if you are into picking mushrooms or mushroom hunting, as I like to call it, you want to have some kind of reference guide for the mushrooms that you pick. And I know this might seem extra or like unnecessary because these days everybody has a phone and there are apps for mushroom identification. Still, I honestly used this deck, just picked it up with me when going mushroom hunting, and actually maybe not for edibles because I can already recognize them well, because actually I was taught by my grandmother how to recognize the most common Polish edible mushrooms, so I don't need aid with that necessarily, but I have discovered some really cool species of unedible or poisonous mushrooms thanks to this deck, and was able to identify them in nature thanks to this deck. And maybe I will be able to find this one. Yeah, this one. This one, I'm not sure what it's called in English, but you have the Latin name down here. Lacaria amethystina, which is basically something to do with amethyst. But these, I learned about them from this deck, and they actually grow in the forest nearby. And these are really fun because they tend to grow in places where, like on cemeteries and other places where basically there's bodies or a dead body in the soil. They really like that kind of environment. So it was really cool to find them in my forest and being, kind of trying to figure out, was somebody killed here or was this like, an animal, just kind of adding spook factor to my daily forest walks, I suppose. So I really love this deck for that purpose. So of course it serves a double purpose. At one hand, it can be used for reading playing cards, for divination, just as plain playing cards, but also for divination with the meaning added from the mushrooms. If a mushroom is toxic or non-edible, for example, that can add something to your reading, right? But also it can serve as a kind of helpful identification guide when out in nature for identifying mushrooms. The next one is about Polish birds, and honestly, like, I'm pretty good at identifying animals, but birds are my weakness, I suppose. I really suck at identifying them. So again, this deck is actually helpful when it comes to identifying birds that are local to where I live. So I'm sure that the birds I'm looking at aren't like from another continent, but they live here in this country, in, you know, the local land where I am. So I really love this deck, and it's actually taught me quite a bit about birds. I know, again, I could Google this, I could find information about this in books, etc. But I find that this serves a double purpose. I can, again, take it on walks with me, or I can use this for divination and also use this added correspondence of a specific bird to the reading, to the meaning of the base meaning of the card in the playing card reading system that I use. So these are the birds. Then we have the insects. Just gonna show you a few without saying much, because honestly, same thing, right? Identification, learning about species, trying to see which ones live where I live. So, you know, helpful shit. And I just love the aesthetics of it, of course. And lastly, animals. So, of course, we have żubr, which is a Polish bison or bison-like animal anyway. And then, of course, some other animals that live in Poland. This doesn't mean, of course, that they live only in Poland. Many of them are, you know, in Europe, in America, in other places with similar climate. But yeah, it's cool to see animals that definitely live where I live, at least some of them. So that's that. Would be also cool to have like a plant playing card deck, but I haven't seen any plant decks from this series, or like maybe a tree deck. That would be awesome as well. So I only have the mushrooms, and others are the ones you've seen. So other than these ones, which I really love, I also have some other playing card decks that I really like. For example, this one. This is from like a Polish brand. And this is really plain, except it has those super cool court cards. So I actually prefer kind of plain playing card decks like this. It's easier to read for me when I can clearly see the amount of, you know, this stuff that is supposed to be on the cards, just more traditional imagery. So this one is really cool, actually. I love it. Has cool witchy vibes, right? Another one I have in this Hiker's Mint tin is a deck with some Polish folkloric traditional patterns. These are often on embroidery or on paintings. So it's just a really cute, tiny playing card deck. This is actually the first deck that I was trying to learn divination with playing cards with. And yeah, so I have fond memories of using this deck. Honestly, I don't think decks like this are good for beginners, because you don't have this visual representation of the suits on the cards. So it's kind of just harder to remember, I guess, or get this like very quick reaction to each of the cards just by seeing the way that the suits are, like the amount of hearts, for example, are laid out on each card, right? So, but still, I really love it. And then lastly, I have this super fancy deck from uusi, which is the Pagan circular Pagan playing cards. I'm not sure if I'm saying the name correctly. I got it from an awesome friend as a gift, which thank you. And I will be grateful forever, because this is actually my favorite deck playing card deck to read with. On the suits, it has the same images as in the Pagan Otherworlds Tarot, which I also have and will show later. So yeah, it has this cool vibe that I really love aesthetically. And actually, I wasn't sure how, handy it would be to read with a circular playing card deck, but it's fucking amazing, honestly. And it also has this card from the Death card from Tarot, as well as the Devil. I think it was somewhere here earlier on, and that's actually perfect because for me, in my practice, I do like to have representations of the Devil and the Death Mother. So this is like, a perfect combination in this deck. So I use those cards as significators for those forces. Anyway, this is one of the decks that I only use at home though, because I'm kind of scared of ruining it. I'm kind of precious about it, but I absolutely love it. So now moving on to more random themes, I suppose. We have some Lenormand decks, and first things first, we have this very basic Lenormand deck. I think it's from Piatnik, if I'm not mistaken. And my copy is of course trimmed because I like to trim shit. So it's one of those very classical Lenormand decks with, how it usually looks basically. So it's nothing, out of the ordinary, I suppose. Very easy to read. You immediately recognize what the card is. There's no confusion, which often happens for me with other decks. And I find that with playing card decks and with Lenormand decks, it's really important for me, I know this is not the case for like everybody, but for me, it's important to have a card that is immediately recognizable for what it is, and I don't have to look at it and think, what the fuck is this card? Is this like the garden, or is this, I don't know, like fucking clouds or whatever? Because with some Lenormand decks, I find it hard to recognize immediately what the card is supposed to represent. So anyway, that's one deck, and I like to carry this one with me. In this tin. It was also hiker's mint, you can tell, but I painted it. And in this one, I actually have two decks that I printed myself at home. This one, I have no idea what it's called, because I have it for years now, but it's basically this very cute tiny Lenormand that I printed on this like recycled kind of yellowish thick cardstock at home and cut out myself. And the pictures are just mostly black and white, except you have those suits here in red that are supposed to be red, and the images look like pictures from an old book of some kind, maybe like old lino cuts, some of them, or like old woodcut images, I'm not sure. I just fucking love it. I think it's absolutely adorable. Very tiny also. And another one, also a deck that I printed at home, and I like did the backs myself as well for it. And this one I think is from Carrie Paris, if I remember correctly. It's been also years since I printed this one. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think this was my first ever Lenormand deck. And I fucking love it. I love the quirky shape of it, kind of like a coffin shape. And the images, it's very easy to recognize what the card is depicting. There's no guessing. And yeah, I've done many readings with this one. And it's just perfect for doing the grand tableau because it's so tiny. Same for that other one. I just love it for that purpose. So with my Lenormand decks, I really love them for their quality to be those similarly to playing cards, but maybe even more so being this super down-to-earth, snappy, very honest. It always gives me, reading with Lenormand always gives me this vibe of talking to this old auntie who's kind of a bitch, and she's just going to, you know, sit with you over coffee and a cigarette and tell you things how they really are. That kind of a vibe. So I think for folk magic practices, this is often something that is very helpful when it comes to like quick, snappy readings when you need to check something quickly. And I just have to say straight away, when it comes to Lenormand and playing cards, when it comes to playing cards, I am a beginner. I'm still learning. When it comes to Lenormand, I am, let's say, intermediate. This is not something I'm fluent at. Tarot is something I'm fluent at the most. This is something I'm more intermediate at. So, yeah, just putting it out there for whatever reason. Next, we have oracles. And first, of course, I need to mention Memento Mori because it's an oracle and a Lenormand deck at the same time. So this means that it has all the Lenormand cards, traditional Lenormand cards within the structure of the deck. So you can separate them and use them as a Lenormand deck. But also it has cards that are depicting tools, items, maybe even situations in some ways that have a lot to do with folk magic actually. One of the expansion packs for this deck is specifically folk magic themed, which I absolutely fucking love. And this deck, you can probably see, it's absolutely fucking wrecked because I just use it so much. Since I got it a few years ago, I never put it down. Like it's always been since then on my altar and never went away. And I will just continue to use it until it falls apart probably. I use it for communication with the dead most of all, but also I like to use it for either, again, those Lenormand style kind of quick, snappy readings, as well as planning my spellcraft or ritual work. This is something that I really like to use for predicting how a spell or ritual is going to go, if I need to adjust something, or even to help me plan what kind of items to use, what kind of tools to use, what to be wary of, that kind of a thing. It's just perfect for that. I fucking love this deck. I think if I had to pinpoint one deck that is the most helpful in my folk magic practice, this would probably be the deck. And the cards you can see here are just a tiny fraction of the entirety of it. I have a few expansions, and the way I like to use this deck is to curate my own deck in a way that it's small enough that I can actually handle it. So I like to riffle shuffle, so this needs to be not thick like this, which it probably would be if I put all the cards in it, because then I wouldn't be able to use it. So I just curate it, and every now and then, if I feel like it, I will switch some cards around to better reflect my current practice. So next, this deck is called Rezy Roda, and if I got it as a gift, but from a dear friend as well. I think it's from Russia. I have it for quite a few years now. I don't know if it's still available or not. This is basically a deck that's very much rooted in Slavic mythology. So you just have, deities and spirits from Slavic mythology. Very straightforward. And I think this is one of the things that are very specific to, you as an individual, as a practitioner, and your craft, that to me it makes no sense whatsoever to use decks where there are spirits or deities from cultures or pantheons that I have nothing to do with, because I don't know how to explain this, because I know that some people work with them as archetypes or symbols of natural phenomena, of the elements, whatever. If you are an animist and the being local is important to you, I just find that it's kind of pointless to include spirits that are very far away and it's never been documented historically that those spirits were in any way, shape or form important in the practice of local practitioners. I will just leave it at that, basically. Another oracle that I find is kind of on theme is the Pvrgatorivm Heks deck, which this one is, just this struggle, I suppose, of being a practitioner of magic, but also living in a society that's Catholic, Christian, and having to practice in a smart way, in an adaptive way, I suppose, which often shows up in the form of dual faith. This is themed around the witch trials and the oppression of the church and torturing people and guilt-tripping people into being God-fearing, but also dealing with the shadow side of that and really facing that. So as somebody who grew up in Catholicism, this is the main religion that is practiced here, and it's also linked with politics. In Poland, the church and the state are not separate, which is kind of fucked up when you think about it, that this is still the case in the 21st century. So these shadows, these demons of all the horrible things that people have experienced over the ages at the hand of the church, they can very quickly come alive still today in places like the place where I live, in a tiny community in the middle of nowhere in Poland. So this deck, to me, speaks of that very much. Then, of course, we have the Cantigee Oracle, and to me, you know that I will just continue to talk about this deck. To me, this deck is very important in my practice because it's so animistic in nature, and as an animist, as somebody who truly wants to be connected to other beings, and this doesn't only include other humans or other animals, this includes also the invisible folk and the entire ecology, I suppose, of beings where I live. This deck really beautifully speaks to that and helps me stay grounded in my practice and remember that I'm not at the center of the universe and that things are bigger and that things in nature just happen at their own rhythm. And I can either resist that rhythm or I can become part of it. This deck is really beautiful at helping me remember that that's the case. See, the self-tending fire. How fucking beautiful is that? I look at these cards and I'm immediately just in this kind of peaceful, contemplative mood. So I absolutely love that. And I think that anybody who perceives themselves to be or identifies as an animist would really love this deck in their practice. And it's really rooted in ecology and it's not culture specific. So I feel like this is one of those decks that are fairly universal, I would say. And then lastly, when it comes to oracle decks, I have this deck, but I have to, before I show the deck, I need to mention some things. So just for the record, this deck is by Alana Fairchild, and honestly, I don't like her work. I don't agree with her approach. I think that she does a really bad job at exploiting the symbols, the deities of the cultures that she draws from, and she clearly has no idea what she's talking about. But also to each their own. I feel like for me in my practice there's no space for that. As I mentioned, I can't see myself really working with spirits that don't come from where I come from in any way. There's no connection for me, honestly. But when it comes to Mother Mary, I feel like Alana Fairchild as a random white woman, this is probably her best deck in my opinion because of the just, more intimacy that she has with this background than any other. So I just feel like there's less appropriation and less fucking making shit up where it's not her place to make shit up. Anyway, Mother Mary Oracle. Everybody. I have mine trimmed and edged because, again, I just don't give a fuck about how she named all of those Marys. The art is by Shiloh, Sophia, McCloud, by the way, and I mostly love this deck for the art itself. Honestly, I don't read the guidebook, I don't fucking care. So just looking at this art, it reminds me of all of the folkloric Marys that are present in my culture. Like Mary pretty much became this mask or like a placeholder post-Christianization for all possible deities, spirits, local spirits, you know, etc. So the way she's depicted here really reminds me of that, and all of the Marys that are worshipped, you could say, in our folklore, and often petitioned for help and petitioned for, you know, various kinds of magic, aid in magic, etc. So she is the most important syncretic figure in folk magic in Poland post-Christianization. So these cards just show all of her aspects of, you know, like being connected to sacred springs and plants and cycles of nature and the elements and the kind of unconditional love for all creation. So I think it's just beautiful, and I just love to sometimes pull some of those cards for some of the feast days of specific Marys and just place them on my altar, or simply just admire the artwork. So that's that. Of course, this is a deck for somebody who doesn't mind working with Mary. I know this is not for everybody, but it's certainly for me. And lastly, some tarot decks, just a random selection of things that I thought would work well. So, of course, as somebody who's Slavic, I really enjoy the Slavic Legends Tarot because it's rooted in the myths, in the legends that are known to me, that are ingrained within me since I was a child. So many of those cards represent Slavic deities. I can see those traditional types of clothing that's used in various regions here. Some nature spirits, just, you know, the nature itself and the animals that are on some cards. They really feel like home, you know? All of this is familiar, and I feel like it just adds this familiar vibe to my readings. And tarot for me in my practice is different from Lenormand or playing card decks, where tarot to me is for deeper exploration in general. I feel like playing cards and Lenormand especially are great for everyday matters and getting quick answers and getting called out and getting clear directions for working, doing, you know, action points, whereas tarot is more contemplative and just leaves this space for deeper contemplation or connecting to, as I like to call them, those divinatory currents that eventually can lead to trance or to direct spirit communication. So this is just one example. Another deck, this one is by Ukrainian creators. This is the Witch Folk Tarot. Mine is trimmed for reasons that you can see in another video. But this deck also, the imagery feels very familiar, but it's also in a way more neutral. To me, this deck is very much kind of rooted in this theme of spirit flight and dream work, personally. It just the vibes of it. It feels like dreamscapes. It feels like what it feels like to practice spirit flight. And some of those cards even directly show images of spirit flight. At least that's how they look to me. So for example, this one is this witch levitating. This also like, you know, a body dreaming and then the spirit leaving the body. You have those spirit animals, some spirit plants and animals, of course the planets, of course some spirits, humanoid spirits. See this one, for example, just flying above the forest. How fucking cool is that? And here's like a bunch of witches flying above the forest. You have this one and then like a bunch of witches. Actually, it looks like they are flying on somebody, which is fucking hilarious. But yeah, I fucking love this deck. It feels like the woods at night. It's kind of like dark and creepy, witches dancing by the fire, you know, being in love with the dead, getting some knowledge from the ancestors, flying with spirits, that kind of a vibe. I fucking love it, honestly. In similar vein, I have this one. I'm not sure how to say the name of this deck, to be honest. If I should say like Tarot de Carlotides or more in Spanish like Carlotides, I'm not sure, honestly. So somebody let me know if you know. This deck, I know that because I did a tiny bit of research on it, at least from what was available on the internet, that each of the suits represents a different culture or like folkloric vibes. So for example, the pentacles, I think, were Santeria. Then the swords were kind of like local syncretic folklore / fairy tales. Then wands were Celtic, I think. And then cups were Slavic, actually. So, see, wands, fucking amazing. Reminds me of Midsommar, the movie. Then, wait, let me find some more Slavic ones. Oh, see, this one, for example, this is traditional Slavic clothing for like Polish noblemen, for example, wore stuff like this. And it's just so colorful, reminds me of this kind of kitschy folk art, you know? I absolutely fucking love it, to be honest. And now I can't find, see, this is a King of Cups, for example, so a man dressed in bear fur, which makes me think of Veles. Here you have those women wearing pretty traditional Slavic clothing with the scarves on their heads and everything, and the dresses here as well. So yeah, I really love this deck. It also feels familiar, and I like the combination. You have some folkloric Marys as well here, at least 2 depictions that I can think of off the top of my head. Yeah, just really lovely and kind of gives me spring vibes with the backs as well. Just makes me think of like a warm summer night somewhere in the fields, like laying in, you know, flowers and herbs. Really cool. Then I have just a random example of a deck that's old school and kind of like cringy and bad quality, but is Polish. So that's what I'm into, especially recently. I mean, I had this deck for... Can you see it? I've had this deck for years, so it's like nothing new in my collection, but I'm recently just going through a period of time in my life where I'm really into those like old cringy decks or old cringy books from Poland and immersing myself in that. I think it's probably a sign that I'm getting old, but honestly I love it to bits. And I love getting old, for the record. So yeah, just one example of a deck. And I think in folk practices, especially, the feeling of familiarity that comes from working with those, like, as I said, kind of cringy, old school, badly made decks that also feel like they have something to do with where you are and feel local to you. It just really feels, you know, there's this vibe to it. I don't really know how to describe it, but it does feel rooted more and maybe more connected with the ancestors in a way. I know this probably doesn't make sense for some of you. I don't care, honestly. Almost lastly, I have the Pagan Otherworlds, which I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the playing card deck from uusi, the round one. This deck, I've had it for years, also got it as a gift. I suppose I'm really, really lucky with having awesome friends who have gifted me some amazing decks over the years. This one, again, it's Pagan Otherworlds, right? It's mostly based in like European paganism, from what I understand at least. But to me, it does just feel like, you know, it has those old school kind of village vibes. I don't know if you know what I'm trying to say here, but those like, you know, simple clothing, natural landscapes, but also painted in this very classy way. Again, there's this kind of simplicity to it that also feels like spaciousness, that leaves a lot of room for contemplation and for, as I mentioned earlier, just accessing those divinatory currents, like going beyond the cards themselves into something deeper to glean actual wisdom. So I really love this deck for that purpose as well. And lastly, from what I'm going to show you today, is the Herb Crafters Tarot. I think any plant deck would be important to have in a folk witches collection, just because folk magic and folk witchcraft is so much rooted in working with plants, working with plant spirits, making medicine, making food, knowing what to forage and when to forage, and knowing how to grow and when to harvest, that kind of a thing, right? Knowing the properties, both magical and healing properties of plants. So when it comes to this deck, and I just realized it's probably not focusing properly. When it comes to this deck, this is not a perfect deck for me personally, because it's showcases quite a few plants that don't grow where I live, so that's not ideal, because I'm not one of those people who will go out of their way to import plants from far away to use in my practice. I would rather find local substitutes. I don't judge. I think this is everybody's like private business, so you do you. I don't care. I'm just saying that I'm not into that. So this deck has been challenging because of that, but also it's challenged me in a positive way to find substitutes for plants that people in other places, in other continents, use for specific purposes, and finding a good local substitute for those, right? So yeah, I think it's a cool deck. I have other plants decks that fit me more. I just figured I wanted to show this one because I know it's loved by many people. So that's that. I'm not going to show you any more decks. I know that this was way too many already, but they are something I enjoy and I use in my practice. So let me know if you have any decks like that that actually feel meaningful to you in the context of being a folk witch, in any way that you would like to interpret that. So if you would like to maybe do a VR, I would love to see it, or like let me know in the comments below. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching and see you around. Bye.